This is Michael Woodward, and this is episode 250 of Jumblethink.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Jumblethink, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. Our guest on today's show is Kerry Gallivan, the founder of Chimani. Whether you're a new fan or a longtime listener to Jumblethink, if you haven't subscribed already, today's a great day to do it. Head on over to your favorite place to listen to podcasts and click that magical subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode of Jumblethink, and you can check out past episodes while you're there. For Apple Podcasts, super easy, jumblethink.com/iTunes, jumblethink.com/iTunes. Take you right to the app, right to where you can subscribe. Now let's jump into today's show. Hey there, welcome to Jumblethink. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have an incredible show lined up for you today. We are talking to Chimani founder Kerry Gallivan. It's a super cool app, and we're going to talk about that and much, much more in a few moments. Before we get rolling, we want to thank some people who make this show possible. Our friends over at Penji, penji.com. They offer unlimited graphic design at a low monthly subscription. We love them. We think you'll love them too. Head on over to penji.com and use the code JUMBLE to get 15% off your first month. We also want to thank our friends over at opportunityinchina.com. They can help you with connections to teaching and learning experiences abroad. Super great company, opporunityinchina.com. Go check them out. So a couple weeks ago, we were at an event called Podcast Row in New York City. And the event was where I was interviewing 10 incredible entrepreneurs to have their shows here at Jumblethink. And those episodes are coming in the next couple weeks. You're not going to want to miss them. Lots of really cool stories from that event. Well, at that event, we connected up with Chuck Pettick. He is one of the leaders over at Republic. And we had Kendrick Gwynn, the CEO and founder of Republic, on the show a couple months ago. We're going to have Chuck on to tell his story and his role at Republic in the next couple weeks. Well, after the event, Chuck and I and another guy named Ben, we started talking about how we could partner more because we really love Republic. And if you don't know what Republic is, they're basically crowdsourced funding, like a Kickstarter or a not a GoFundMe, but like a Indiegogo. And the difference is that with Kickstarter or Indiegogo, they allow you to invest in a company by buying products or a reward for investing into their campaign. With Republic, you are actually investing in the business itself. So you become part of the ownership of that business. And it's a great way to invest in startups. Well, at the event we were talking, I said, I love what Republic's doing. I love what you guys have going on. We would love to partner more with you and bring on some of the companies that are funding or fundraising through Republic to tell their story and let our listeners know about them. And so today's guest, Kerry Gallivan, founder of Chimani, they are on the Republic platform right now. They're raising capital, but they're doing really cool stuff. They've been around for a while. What they're doing is they've created an iPhone app that helps you engage better with national parks and other outdoor experiences. The app's super cool. It does a lot of different things. They're now partnering with Subaru, and they're bringing that app right to your car, so you don't even have to worry about the cell phone. The best of all, it works right in the parks, even without Wi-Fi, so you don't have to worry about, what if I don't have connection? I can't get the information. You can find tons of information on the app. You can find what are the best trails to hike for my skill level. Where can I find bathrooms? Where can I find water? What am I looking at? What's right in front of me? And much more. And they help you have a better experience at national parks, which more and more people are visiting. And if you're visiting them, you probably noticed that it's oversaturated with people. And so how do you have an experience where you feel like you're connecting with nature and not just being lost in the crowd? Their app helps with all of that. And in today's show, we're going to talk about the app. We're going to talk about how you can go and engage with national parks, why the national parks matter. We're going to talk a lot more about the story of engaging with the outdoors and having adventure. It's a super fun episode. So let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with our friend Kerry Gallivan from Chimani. I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you so much for taking time to be on.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm a big fan of what you're doing. We're going to talk about what you're creating. We connected through Republic, and we're going to talk about that and that campaign and what you're doing there. Let's just let people know what Chimani is.
Sure, absolutely. So at Chimani, we're developing mobile and car-based apps that help people better experience national parks. So right now, if you're going to a national park, there's a lot of overcrowding, and there's just a real challenge to find really quality information, particularly on mobile. So we developed curated guides, which are written by outdoor travel writers, and work completely offline and cover all of the U.S. national parks here, including all of the big ones like Yellowstone, Yosemite, Acadia, pretty much any park here in the U.S.
Super, super cool. We're going to get into that a little bit more. I want to take a step back before we go forward and talk a little bit about your story of entrepreneurship, because that's one of the things we're passionate about, is how you got to the place of really wanting to create your own path in. And what you're creating with an app for adventure, which is discovering the parks, is definitely stepping out in your own path because you're blazing a new way. You've done some crazy things. You've worked in the world of education. You've worked with little movies, creating products for Eddie Bauer and Boston University of Public Health. You've done different things in different spaces. So tell us about that journey of saying, you know what, I have an idea and I want to make it a reality.
Yeah, I think, I certainly was influenced by my father. I mean, he really, I saw him leave a steady job and really kind of go out on his own and try a new venture. And so just as growing up, I mean, that was sort of the first sort of moment that I saw, what is this thing about entrepreneurship? And I have to give a nod to junior achievement as well.
Okay.
It had an early impact to me, those early days. But even as I went through college, and I really kind of sculpted my own pathway in college, which in a lot of ways I think really kind of overflowed into this entrepreneurship journey too. I went to a number of different schools and very much in sort of the experiential education movement. I got really fortunate that before I ended up graduating, I actually got hired for my first professional salaried job in Cambridge, Mass.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate. Yeah, I mean, it's, it was just, there was only one other student in my class that actually had a full-time job that we were graduating with. So it was pretty remarkable. But with that, my journey really for the next 25 years was really working on, I really want to say sort of like almost like social entrepreneurship, in the sense that, I was always immersed in nonprofits. That was my background. My background was in international development. I'd worked all over the world and worked with a lot of international NGOs, but I always worked on really innovative projects. The first one being, basically it was in the early 90s, and we were literally building the first email network for healthcare workers in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. I mean, we literally built and launched a satellite as part of this project back when the only other people that had this type of satellite that we launched was the CIA and the KGB. So we were doing some crazy stuff back then.
Wow. So even though you were working for someone, it sounds like you had a role that was still very entrepreneurial, because it wasn't the typical, hey, you show up for your job and you kind of have the formula figured out, which is what most of employees do, is they kind of know what their role is and they come in. But you were, even back in those early days prior to starting Chimani, you were really helping to innovate in spaces that hadn't been discovered. I mean, you talked about that satellite there. And so it seems like even though you were working for someone, it was still in a very unique position where you got to create and be entrepreneurial as an employee.
Absolutely. And I think we kind of further emphasize, I think in my mind, as I reflect on my journey, I don't really sort of distinguish between whether it's a for-profit, what most people think about when they think about entrepreneurship, or even a nonprofit. Because just like you said, it's about, basically creating your own pathway and helping projects and teams innovate, and that's what I've consistently been attracted to all throughout my life.
Yeah.
It just so happens Chimani is clearly in the for-profit category, but at the same time, it's very much sort of with a social impact bent to what we're doing as well.
Super cool. And I can relate to that. For years, I worked at a church where, yeah, it was your traditional church. You had Sundays, you had Wednesdays, you had youth groups and children's programs, but it was in a very impoverished area. And so they had to come up with creative ways to raise funds and build businesses around funding mechanisms to fund the church itself. And I find that fascinating that for some people, the entrepreneurial trip or journey is one that starts young. For others, it's one that they discover later on. But then people like you, where even though you were doing a job, you were still being able to be entrepreneurial in that. I think that's super fascinating because I see that happening more and more in business where the owners or the managers are saying, hey, we want you to have the space to create in your job. I wonder if on your journey of going from being an employee and working in these different spaces and into starting Chimani, what kind of differences you see whether you're working for someone versus when you're starting your own thing? What are some of the differences there in that process?
Yeah, well, certainly one of the first things is the weight of responsibility certainly changes when you're the one who's really leading everything.
So true.
Yeah, you never quite appreciate, whether it be, an executive director in the context of a nonprofit, or, even just the CEO or whoever's driving steering the ship. Everything changes when, you're basically at the top. So, and that also sort of trickles down to, especially in the startup world, things aren't ultimately moving forward unless you're moving forward or making them move forward.
Yeah.
Because, that's really, in the end of the day, I think about startups, and it's all about creating momentum and maintaining momentum.
Yeah.
Like physically, moving things along, because you're taking an abstract concept and you're turning it into a product, and you're literally creating something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And we sort of don't realize how much, when you step into an established company, how there's just established momentum. A lot of that is just the business mechanics, but you really are just sort of hopping on, a train, and that train is going to keep on moving. Whereas, the analogy I use, we're building a plane while it's flying. It's.
I think Boeing's doing that lately too, it seems like.
Yes, exactly. Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. I want to kind of pivot into Chimani here, and I think a great way to talk about that is at some point you had an idea. You got to a place where you're like, I think there's something here. Tell us about that moment or the origin story of Chimani, and how you went into this pivot and said, this is not just a cool idea. This is something I want to invest time, money, resources, energy into. And that transition from idea into an app, and now you're moving into creating for automobiles too, for cars, and that interaction in the app space in automobiles. So tell us a little bit about that early days of Chimani and how that whole thing unfolded.
Yeah, it was, oddly enough, I can actually trace it back to an epiphany moment that literally happened on top of a mountain.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not sure how many people can actually say that, but it's actually Gorham Mountain in Acadia National Park.
Oh, wow.
And, and it was a real sort of convergence. I think it's like a lot of people, when you're, going through personal challenges, and this example, I was, went for a hike because I was in the middle of a divorce, and I had young kids, and very emotional sort of struggle. And so I would always revert to nature and the outdoors as sort of a healing environment. But at the same time, I was had been working in the K-12 school district as a technology director, and this was in 2008, 2009, and this thing called the iPhone was just like these kids, and what they were doing with it was just kind of blowing me away, and just how I knew that this thing called the smartphone or the iPhone was really going to start to take over things.
Yeah.
And then being in the park at this moment in time where it was early spring and, there was literally no one in the park then. It was still snow and rain. It was just awful, and needing to have like information about, basically where I was going. And the first thing I did was, because this was pretty much the only tool I had, was I pulled out my iPhone. I was like, well, can I find something on here about, what the weather conditions are going to be like, or the trail route? And I realized, wait a minute, there's really no information when I had a cell phone connection. And then the other thing is, I didn't even really have a cell phone connection. So,
it never works to find information when you can't actually pull up anything.
Exactly. And so that was sort of literally this epiphany moment where it was really this convergence. Wow. I saw the road ahead, which was, this iPhone thing is going to take off.
Yeah.
And while I sort of considered myself an early adopter, at that point in time, I knew that this was going to become the norm. And I knew that meant that all these millions of people that go to national parks they were going to be expecting to use that device when they come to these places.
Wow.
But at the same time, I knew that they're going to struggle with getting good quality information that is available on mobile. And at the same time, the infrastructure, one of the beauties of national parks is that we've really limited the development, and that has impacted the ability for cell phone coverage to, sort of have an impact in the parks. And so this issue of lack of connectivity was going to be around for a long time. Yeah. And so then I just realized, I've got a passion for the outdoors. I've got this whole experience of working overseas when I was just in very technology challenged places that I can draw to the table. And then knowing that I wanted to create this experience that, gave people all the necessary information, but was completely designed for mobile. And that was, literally that moment happened on top of that mountain. And I was blazing forward from that point.
Wow. And there's a lot more to the story we're going to unpack in our second segment. As we kind of move towards the end of this first segment, we always ask how you're finding purpose in what you do.
Yeah, I think, it's every time I get a response back from our users where it's reflective on after they've gone on a trip and they tell me how valuable the app was as part of that experience. And because, in the end of the day, one of the main goals is we want people to have the best experience possible when they go to a national park, because that's going to create lasting memories.
Yeah.
And that's going to turn into either impacting future generations, either within your own family, or making sure that there's plenty of funding for these parks. So in the end of the day, it's about hearing from someone who's had a wonderful experience because I used our app. And it's a lot about, people sometimes don't realize that there's a lot of pressure on national parks. And so the more we can really raise the awareness and love for them, the longer and the more guaranteed they are going to stay exactly as they are right now for all of our future generations. And so that's really a lot of ways where I find the purpose, is knowing that we're sort of building that love as much as possible.
Super, super cool. What's one challenge you're currently working to overcome in what you're creating at Chimani?
Yeah, I think, we've gone from this sort of engineering change. We used to do an individual mobile app per park. Now we've changed the model so that we just a single app and you download each individual guide. We've completed that on the iOS side, and now we're working on it on the Android side. So we're sort of flipping the model completely on end, and from what we've been doing over the years. And so there's more of a sort of a product pathway. And like with a lot of things, when you're working with software, you can never kind of move fast enough. You always want to be sort of blazing forward. And it's also sort of a sensitive time period for us. We try not to introduce many changes during the summer months, because that's really the peak visitation time period for folks.
Yeah.
So that's just a side note, kind of we're sort of midstream and sort of an engineering project that changes everything completely for us.
Yeah. And for you, finally, what's the next big goal you have for where you want to take the app?
Yeah, we're really excited about this convergence between the mobile landscape, smartphones, and what we're starting to do within cars. And so just to kind of give the audience a little bit more information on that. So towards the end of this month, we'll be rolling out a custom version of our Chimani app to over 1 million Subarus. So we've partnered with Subaru, and that our Chimani app will now be available directly within the head unit of the vehicles. And so we're really excited about how really, I think, it's almost like thinking back to that 2008 time period where cars and consumers' expectation on what they can do with that sort of head unit, the control center that has all those digital functions, that is almost like getting to an iPhone moment in time.
Wow.
Where people are just going to be wanting to buying their cars and either being able to connect their iPhone, but eventually having that unit itself function like an iPhone or an Android and having all of that functionality built into it. And so we're really excited about really making sure that we're available in as many vehicles as possible and really help bridge that connection between when you get to a park and that using the app within the car as a discovery tool, but then when you get there, you of course transfer over to your phone and you head outside and into the outdoors. That whole convergence of these two markets is really exciting for us.
Wow, super cool. Well, we will be back to go deeper into this conversation, talk to Kerry about something cool they're doing with a company called Republic, and much, much more. We want to take a moment and thank our sponsors for today's show. Our show today is being sponsored by Penji. We love Penji. We think you will too. Penji helps startups, agencies, small businesses, large corporations, and marketing teams achieve more with unlimited graphic design support at one flat monthly rate. Their easy-to-use online platform pairs you with a professional designer and lets you create as many design projects as you want. Think of it as your monthly subscription to top-notch design. No contract, no hourly billing, just fast, simple, and affordable graphic design for all of your needs. We've used them for some great projects here at Jumblethink, including our logo for idea camps, some new banners for our website, some email templates. It's really great, the design that they provide. Best of all, as a listener, you get 15% off your first month. All you have to do is go to Penji, PENJI.com, and use the code JUMBLE to get that 15% off the first month. Again, that's Penji.com. Use the code JUMBLE to get 15% off your first month. We also want to thank our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com. Have you been looking for a way to change your career or social prospects? Do you see the world around you changing and haven't quite figured out what path you should take? You are not alone in seeking opportunity. Visit OpportunityInChina.com for access to scholarships to attend university in China. Or, if you have a bachelor's degree already, OpportunityInChina.com provides access to jobs in the educational sector all across China. Now, working in China is not only often well paid, but it will place you among 1/5 of the world's population, boosting your social network, bringing you more deeply into the story of globalization, and opening up doors you never knew existed. So seize your opportunity now. Visit their website for more information at OpportunityInChina.com. Now let's return to our conversation with today's guest, Kerry Gallivan, founder of Chimani. We are back with Kerry Gallivan and talking about Chimani and much, much more. Before we dive into this segment, how can people find and connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So the best place is, of course, to go to the web. So Chimani.com. So that's spelled CHIMANI.com. And then if you're on an Android or iOS phone, you can just simply go to the search function and type in Chimani, once again, CHIMANI, and you'll have our app come up right away.
Cool. And yeah, you were talking to me before. You have something really cool for our listeners. Why don't you tell them about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that Chimani works, our business model is that for all those really detailed travel guides for all 64 national parks, we have a subscription. And so that subscription is typically $30 a year. But for your listeners, we're happy to offer a special promo. They can go to our website and press the subscribe button, and there is a coupon code offering. And if they put in Jumble into that coupon code, they'll receive 50% off their first year's subscription with Chimani.
Wow, thank you so much for doing that. And if you're listening, you love the outdoors, you love national parks, definitely need to check this out and give it a go. I think you're going to love it. All right, so we've talked a little bit about Chimani and the story behind it. We've talked about your story and your journey into entrepreneurship. I want to talk a little bit about it's kind of a different topic than what we normally talk about, but you are in a unique place where you're taking this kind of public by working with Republic, which we've had Kendrick Gwynn on here, and Chuck, who's also on their team, is going to be on the podcast in a couple weeks to talk more about Republic. But they are helping organizations and businesses like yours connect with investors. And it's not like a Kickstarter where you're investing into buying a product or a service or something like that, an experience, but you actually are giving people the opportunity to invest in your idea. You've been doing this for a while now. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's something which, as I'm sure Chuck will talk more about, it comes out of the Jobs Act. And where we saw this wonderful opportunity is when you start to raise money as a private company. Before the Jobs Act, you were really restricted to people that had a certain amount of wealth or investment income. What this now allows us is to really go to anyone who's interested in this concept, and they can invest as little as $50 into Chimani. And like you said, rather than just simply getting a product, you actually get a small percentage of ownership in the company. What was exciting for us is this was a perfect moment in time. We've had a long history, a long core audience of users. Our first mobile app was launched in 2010 for Acadia National Park, and we've just been focusing on building out all of the national parks since then. So for folks that are going to the parks, every year, that's what they do. They've been using Chimani for literally over 8 years now. I can reach out to folks that have been using our apps for that long. So it was a perfect opportunity for us to really go to our own users and to offer up this opportunity to invest in the company. That, I think, was probably our biggest opportunity because we've really kind of been building it along the way. At the same time, it was this great opportunity to reach out and find new investors as well. And that's, I think, one of the other great benefits of Republic. We're still based in Maine, so just outside of Portland, Maine. So we're not in Silicon Valley, we're not in New York or even Boston, or doing our thing up here in Maine. Then that's also very challenging.
Yeah,
Maine isn't known for its venture capital.
Yeah, it's not really a startup hub that's well known.
Yeah, certainly, like a lot of communities, Portland is really starting to kind of make its own in terms of that, but it's still Maine at the end of the day. So, Republic really, they open you up to create an opportunity for folks like our own users who perhaps are, just doing their first investment like this, to very sophisticated investors that are actually on the Republic platform and are investing in a number of companies. So it really was a tremendous opportunity for us.
Super cool. And we'll have links to not only Chimani, but if you're interested in being a part of what they're building and investing in what they're doing, we'll have the link to the Republic campaign right there. When does that end, by the way?
It ends on August 19th. So we still have about 44 days left of that campaign.
Yeah, super cool. We're big fans of Republic and big fans of the natural parks too. So let's talk a little bit about natural parks, or national parks. They're all natural, I guess, but national parks. You obviously have an affinity, an love for the national parks. And I think a lot of people are overwhelmed when they think about, hey, I want to go to Yosemite, or I want to go to Yellowstone, or I want to go to any kind of national park. There's a lot of uncertainty about what you can and can't do, where you should and shouldn't go, what things you can see, the difficulty of it, what resources you need to take along. And you're helping people understand how to be better prepared, but also on the trail, how to actually navigate the issues that they may encounter. Maybe it's they ran out of water. Where do I go get clean water? So talk to us a little bit about the national parks as a whole, and then what people really need to be thinking about when they go on an adventure. We're fans of adventure here. So what do listeners need to know when they go, hey, I want to go to a national park and I don't want to be stuck in the caravan of a billion cars going through Yellowstone. I want to kind of see the things that are maybe a little bit more hidden.
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. So I think one of the first things I'll say is that for folks, they need to realize that there's actually 419 national parks.
Wow.
But yeah, it's really kind of amazing.
Can I pause you there for a second? Because
sure.
There are different kinds of lands. There are national parks, there are state parks, there are Bureau of Land Management parks, and other places. So what delineates a national park from a state park? Obviously, national being run by the government, state. Like, what are the distinctions and differences between these different managed or publicly owned lands, if you will?
Sure, yeah. So at the federal level, you have national parks. In order to be a national park, one of those 419, that means that it's actually managed by the National Park Service. Okay. And that site has been designated either from a natural resource importance or from a cultural resource importance. Okay. And so it very much is sort of integrated into, the history of our country, whether from history or from just these iconic natural areas, which we need to preserve for future generations. Yeah. And that really is sort of the sole purpose of the National Park Service. Now, you also mentioned, national forests. Now, these are large tracts of land which are managed actually by the U.S. Forest Service, which falls underneath the Department of Agriculture.
Wow.
So those are technically sort of natural resources from a classic resource perspective, which is why they fall underneath that department. But increasingly, it's in fact the national forests have the greatest number of trails in the U.S.
Wow.
So obviously they're used a lot for recreational purposes as well.
And I think of places like the Redwood National Forest out in north of Monterey as one of those places, or Sequoia National Forest, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And so in a lot of cases, you'll find national parks, which are really surrounded by these national forests.
Okay.
So in a lot of cases, like almost every sort of large national park tends to kind of have that structure because just kind of originally the land is owned by the federal government and then it's sort of used for these mixed purposes. And then the last sort of federal category that a lot of people think of is the Bureau of Land Management. Yeah. And so they will own large tracts of land, which in many ways, they're once again tied towards resource management. They will lease rights to develop these lands, or they designate them as preserves. But that's a huge landowner. It's the largest landowner, if you will, of the federal government here in the U.S. And so those are really sort of the major categories at the federal level. And then when you go down to the state level, each state has their own natural resource management division, and they are typically the ones that are managing all of the different state parks. And so then, you want to kind of take a step further, you go down to the super local level, you typically will find either municipal parks, which are run by your local towns, or you'll find a significant amount of land trusts. And so these are nonprofits that are set up to create typically tax benefit easements at the local level, but a lot of those land trusts are opened up for recreational opportunities as well. So there's a whole sort of dynamic and scale to sort of who runs this land? Is it federal? Is it local? Is it, so, but the end user, a lot of people I just want to go for a hike or walk with my family. So, a lot of that is kind of lost on the experience.
And you mostly focus on resource or information around national parks, not the forest or anything else like that.
Yeah, for now, we're focusing on the national parks. That's what we've been focusing on. Yeah.
All right. So, sorry to go on that little bunny trail. I just thought it was a really important distinction because I didn't even know that. I didn't think about the difference between a national park and the national forest. I'm sitting in South Dakota today as we talk, and we have the Black Hills National Forest here, and I thought of it as a national park. I didn't make that distinction, so I think that's really important to know.
Yes, and that's a great example because actually that's one of the few guides that we did because the Black Hills are so important recreational area.
Yeah.
Our guide is actually about both Mount Rushmore as well as the Black Hills as well. So that whole sort of region is sort of combined together.
Yeah, super cool. All right, so let's go back to that initial question. Sorry to kind of go on this little side story here, but often when we go to the national parks, we don't know exactly how to navigate them. We get the park map, we open it up, it's huge, and we go, yeah, that looks like the trail I want, or yeah, that's the adventure I want to go on. So how can people really be prepared and have the right mindset of knowing where they should and shouldn't go and what they should and shouldn't see and how they can kind of find those hidden treasures?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the first things I say is really to try and begin that planning process as early as possible, because inevitably, if you're going to go to any of the iconic national parks in the summertime, even if it's just for a simple day trip, what you're going to be faced with is really, you're going to get that black iconic brochure / map handed to you when you go through the entrance gate. Yeah. But the likelihood of being able to talk to a ranger, especially on a Saturday or a Sunday, is actually pretty low because there aren't enough rangers in these places.
Oh, wow.
They do a wonderful service, but the amount of people that are going to the parks is completely disproportionate in terms of the amount of rangers which are available to ask those basic questions. I'm here for 3 hours. What should I see? Or where's the restroom? Because I really need
That's an important question for a lot of people.
We're driving all this way, and a lot of these things aren't as obvious within the park. So, and that's really where Chimani comes in.
Okay.
We want folks to be downloading the app early on in the trip planning process so that they can get all of the information. We're going to help you decide, what are some of the best times to go to the parks. A little known secret to share with everyone is you can virtually have any park to yourself.
Wow.
If you get there by 9 a.m.
Okay.
You got to wake up early.
But 9 a.m. is not too early.
Exactly.
Like I think early, I think like 5 a.m. is early.
Exactly. There's something about between that 9 and 10 a.m. time period. It's pretty much when all of the day trippers have started to flow into most parks. And you also have to realize that there's limited housing within the parks themselves. So many people are staying in the surrounding communities. Yeah. And that's sort of that natural time period when people have woken up, they've had breakfast, and they've driven the distance they need to. So if you're going to the parks in the summertime, try and get there as early as possible. That'll sort of have the best chance of having a really rewarding experience and trying to avoid the crowds.
And I would assume that if you get a jump on everyone else, then you are further out and they're trying to catch up to you the entire day. And then by the time you're coming back out, you're meeting up with them halfway, and you make that transition where they're passing you and you're passing them, and then you don't see them again.
Exactly. And that's sort of the great time to go to those iconic places. If you're just arriving into the south rim of the Grand Canyon, one of the first places everyone goes to is Mather Point.
Okay.
It's the most iconic viewpoint of the Grand Canyon. You can be there and you're not fighting for just a photograph. You can enjoy those iconic places. And then you take the rest of the day and you really sort of start to get off into the other areas, which are simply further away, and take more time. That's another great way to begin to avoid the crowds. If you start to go in places within the parks, like for example, Yosemite Valley in the middle of the summer can almost seem like a small city, especially if there's any sort of animal sighting, let alone a bear sighting. It turns into gridlock because everyone wants to spot the bear. Yeah. You can go up to Tuolumne Meadows, which is sort of the slightly northern part of the park, and have this amazing experience in the middle of the summer. and not have the types of crowds that you might see in the valley. You can still get to the valley and see the Half Dome, see El Capitan early in the morning, but then you still have plenty of time to explore the outer reaches of the park where people aren't going.
Wow.
So I think you really have to sort of think about time management as much as possible. And the beauty of that is this is what we talk about within our mobile app. And we really sort of break down all of the possible places within the parks. And we'll tell you which ones are going to be the crowded ones, which are the less visited ones, so that you really can begin to plan that out and have that, once again, that best possible experience, regardless of the time of year.
Yeah. Absolutely. Super, super, super cool. What are some other things that people don't take into consideration when they go to these parks that they really should do?
Yeah. So if you've never gone to a national park, and especially the iconic ones like Yellowstone, if you're planning on hoping to stay within the park, you really have to book that lodging out well over 12 months in advance.
Oh, wow. So you're thinking a year, maybe even 2 years out.
Exactly. Yellowstone, it's just a huge, just from a physical kind of layout, it's a huge park, and it takes a long time to kind of get in the park and get out of the park. So you don't want to sort of be in a position where you're having to stay in some of the gateway communities, and you're having to constantly sort of drive in and out of the park. So you really want to take the time to really try and plan out as long as possible. The other thing is that, it's really important for people to realize that these are really natural resources, and the Park Service has done their best to keep them in their natural state. So that also means there aren't, significant safety concerns. You really need to be, especially if you have young children, or even just sort of, this is not going to be like Disney World where they're making sure you're as safe as possible. We hear these stories constantly of all these tragedies within the park, and a lot of it is just poor judgment.
Wow.
You wade a little bit too far into the water, and not realizing that this has an enormous current that you're not used to. Of course, just the wanting to capture these trips on Instagram or other types of social media, and you just step further, too close to an edge. Unfortunately, that's one of the common causes of accidents these days, is just trying to capture these things on social media. So important for people to really be, these are amazing places, but you really need to have as great common sense as possible when you're exploring them.
Yeah. All right. We've talked a lot about what you're going to kind of see from Chimani. We've talked a lot about some tips on navigating the parks. Top 5 parks people need to go to in their lifetime.
Oh, such a hard question.
Well, I've got to ask the hard questions, right?
Okay, yeah. So I think, I'll break it down into a little bit of geographic.
Okay.
So I think, so I'm going to start, we're based in Maine. You have to visit Acadia National Park.
Okay.
It's sort of an island unto itself. It's literally an island, but there's nothing else like it in terms of just being able to see the sunset and having those mountains meeting the ocean.
Wow.
And the Maine coastline. And secondly, there is nothing like the Canadian/US Rockies that you find in Glacier National Park. The type of mountains that you see there are completely different, even from what you see in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's just an amazing park, and also you've got to respect the grizzlies up there. You're very apt to sort of run into or at least see a grizzly up there, and so it's one of the parks which I love. I love that interaction with the wildlife, or at least being able to observe them from far away. And I will also sort of put it there is also nothing like Yosemite. I mean, pulling into Yosemite Valley or even looking down at Yosemite Valley, it's still to this day, every time I see it, it looks like a painting or a photograph.
Wow.
It's just, you want to reach out and touch it. It's just so incredible.
And that's where Ansel Adams did a lot of his photography, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. That's what he really sort of, made that valley famous in many ways. And then, once again, the Grand Canyon, another great example where you don't think it's real when you see it.
Wow.
and also that is even equally because it's expansive, so it goes on for so far. But one of the things about the Grand Canyon is, people really need to get into the canyon.
Yeah.
Even if it's a short hike down, resist just wanting to just go to that Mather Point, take a photograph, and then turn around and walk away and said you've seen the Grand Canyon. There's so much more to the Grand Canyon. It's actually so remarkable. And then I'll throw out a couple of kind of unique ones. I think Joshua Tree is really a really unique park. It's it's a popular park. It's very popular for a lot of the mountain climbers because they'll migrate from up from Yosemite down to Joshua Tree in the wintertime.
Okay.
But there's something about those plants. Those trees are just kind of out of this world.
Yeah.
And if you love desert parks, it's actually quite remarkable. The other thing that I'll say too is I'll actually put out Capitol Reef in Utah. It's actually my favorite of the Utah parks because it combines sort of the arches that you would feel that you get at Arches National Park to the north.
Yeah.
But then also a lot of that unique geological landscape that you would get at Bryce or at Zion in the south. And that's why it's right in the middle. It's sort of this convergence of these two areas of the state. So I love Capitol Reef a lot because you can actually go there in the middle of the summer and you don't have to actually get there at 9 a.m. You can actually experience the park, much to yourself because not a lot of people go there. And then I'll just throw in a bonus. There's nothing like Death Valley. It is the closest to being on Mars that I think any of us can experience. It really is sort of out of this world kind of experience when you're in the valley, regardless of whether it's in the wintertime when it's a little bit more reasonable in terms of heat, or it's the summertime right now when they're pushing 130 degrees in the middle of the day.
Yeah. Super, super cool. We will be back with Kerry Gallivan, and we're going to talk rapid fire questions. We'll be right back. Our passion here at Jumblethink is to help you turn your dreams and ideas into reality. One of the ways we do that is through our podcast, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs and give you some tips on how you can turn those dreams and ideas into reality. But another way we do that is through idea camps. And we have an idea camp coming up this fall. Here's what you need to do. Head on over to jumblethink.com/ideacamps, jumblethink.com/ideacamps, and let's start the conversation to see if idea camps are right for you. What is an idea camp? Well, it's a 3-day event, and you can come to all or just one day of it, and we'll help you turn that idea into a plan for the future so that your idea stops being an idea and starts becoming a reality. So head on over to jumblethink.com/ideacamps to learn more about idea camps. We also want to thank our friends over at opportunityinchina.com for sponsoring today's show. Whether you want to learn or teach abroad, they are the place to go. Head on over to opportunityinchina.com to learn more about how they can help you find the right school to go to or right school to teach at in Asia and beyond. So head on over, opportunityinchina.com. We also want to thank our friends over at Penji.com for sponsoring today's show. They're doing awesome things. If you need graphic design for any of your business needs and you're always searching for the perfect design or designer, Penji is the place to go. We have been so happy with how they've been able to help our stuff here at Jumblethink with quick turnaround times, amazing designs, and many, many options when it comes to the designs that we get. What do you need to do? Head on over to Penji.com. Use the code JUMBLE, JUMBLE, to get 15% off your first month. We're big fans of them, and I think you will be too. So head on over Penji.com. Use that code JUMBLE to get 15% off your first month. Now let's jump back into rapid fire questions with today's guest, Kerry Gallivan. We are back with Kerry Gallivan, and we are doing rapid fire questions. Kerry, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
All right. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a pilot, but then I realized I had poor eyesight.
What's one tip you'd give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
Write it down on a napkin and ask as many friends as possible whether or not they would use whatever it is they're trying to build.
What's one big lie about entrepreneurship you'd like to break?
It's very challenging on mental health. So you need to make sure that you've got a really effective way to manage stress, because that's one of the unsung topics of it, is that, you got to really have a good mindset and make sure it lasts.
What is one change you'd like to see in the world?
I would like to see more people travel around the world, especially within the U.S., and really continue to have more of a global mindset.
What do you want your legacy to be?
I want to be remembered as someone who is innovating and having, a lasting impression and building something that lasts more than one generation.
Where do you find inspiration?
My family, my children, my wife, and just, being with them. They really are the drivers in this journey in many ways.
What is one book you think every dreamer or entrepreneur should read?
I would say David Allen's Getting Things Done. It talks about workflow methodology, and you need to be super organized if you're going to be an entrepreneur.
How do you define success?
Can you do something when, in the end of the day, you're happy for what you were doing?
What is one trend you're currently excited about?
Excited about this convergence between mobile and what's happening within cars around apps and mobile interfaces.
What is one habit you find helpful in your life as an entrepreneur?
I practice Tai Chi every morning as much as possible to try and manage stress.
What is one thing you wish you would have known when you first started out?
How hard it really was going to be, but then I don't really want to know that, because maybe I wouldn't have chosen that.
If you weren't doing what you're doing today, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think I'd be working on a different type of company that I'd be building.
And our final rapid fire question. What is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
I lived in Nepal for 6 months. I went back there twice, and yet I never went trekking in Nepal.
Wow.
And I got to go back, and I got to go trekking in Nepal. So that's on the bucket list, right up there on the top.
Nice. As we wrap up today's show, what's one last thought you want to leave all of us with today?
I'd love to leave this thought, which is go see a national park.
Yeah.
There are so many national parks around. There are ones that are within your state, not the big ones. Go to the small ones. It really is and covers an amazing part of our history, from the natural to the cultural, and they really are treasures. So take a moment and visit a national park.
Super cool. Kerry, thanks so much for taking time out and being with us. We love what you're creating, and anyone listening, you got to go check it out. You got to get out into those parks, into those places, and just go explore and have some fun. So thanks again, Kerry, for being on and sharing your story.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and it's been a pleasure.
In a moment, we'll be back for some final thought.
Qui caractérise les temps modernes. Vous serez éloigné du monde.
We would love to connect with you, and it's easy to do. Head on over to jumblethink.com. You'll find links to all of our social channels like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You'll also be able to drop us a note when you go to the contact page. That comes right to me. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and I'd love to hear how today's show has challenged or encouraged you to chase your own dreams and ideas. While you're at jumblethink.com, one last thing you should do, you should sign up for our newsletter. It's easy to do. You'll find it right on the front page of the website, and you'll also find it on the podcast page. So go ahead and subscribe. That way we can let you know about exciting things happening at Jumblethink, new episodes that are being released, and some great giveaways coming up in the weeks to come. So head on over, jumblethink.com, and let's connect, let's be friends, and let's do this journey of idea and dream chasing together.
Vous devez écouter ce disque plusieurs fois.
I hope that you are enjoying today's show with Kerry Gallivan, founder of Chimani. They're really doing some great stuff. And one of the takeaways for me in today's show is very simple. We need to have more adventure in our life. Recently, we had Walter Stein from Paleo Adventures on the show. And the more I talk to people who are doing amazing things, whether an entrepreneur, whether in the philanthropic space, whether they are simply just trying to incorporate a better life, one trend seems to be consistent through all of them, and that's that they incorporate adventure, a sense of going out and discovering and experiencing into the process of their journey. And I think this is really valuable for entrepreneurs. If you don't have adventure built into what you're doing, I think the journey gets really boring. It gets very stale, and it becomes that chore that you have to always do. I want to ask you a question. In your life right now, do you feel like you're just coasting along? Do you feel like things are just the status quo? Every day is the same. It's very vanilla and bland and boring. Although I have to say I like vanilla ice cream. So that's a little side note there. But if it's feeling like it's not an exciting journey, you may not be pushing into the things you were created to do. I love that Chimani is offering a tool that helps make the experience of adventure more accessible to everyday people. Often we put obstacles in our journey. Often we say why we can't do something instead of figuring out how we can overcome the obstacle so we can do something. And the reality is that for you in this journey of life, if you aren't fully living, then you are selling out to something less than your full created purpose. As I think back on today's show, it amazes me that this idea that Kerry had was birthed out of a place of tragedy, loss, and a season of transition. Often we despise these seasons. We get into victim mentality where it's like, why is this happening to me? I know it happens for me that way, and I'm sure it happens for you that way too. And so it's easy to go out and just say, well, life isn't going to work out, things aren't great, and you give up on the journey of really pushing into the fullness of what life has to offer you. And I want to encourage you today, whether you're at an incredible high point in your life and everything is going amazingly, or you're at the lowest season of your life, to push into this place of adventure. When you do, I think it opens up new possibilities. It allows you to explore the unknown, and that unknown releases new opportunities, new dreams, new purpose. Chimani is a great tool to give you a first step on this journey, just to get out there and do something. I know many of you have probably said, well, one day I'll go to a national park. One day I'll go explore. One day I'll hike to the beautiful places that I've always dreamed to go. If you continue to wait for one day will never come. The only day that happens is the day you create. So if you want one day to happen, you have to be intentional about that journey. All right, so what does that mean for you? It's your turn to get out there. It's your turn to dream big. It's your turn to think about the possibilities, to think about that list of things you've always wanted to do, whether it's starting a business, whether it's going on an adventure, whether it is some other major milestone. And it's your turn to actually do it. So today, let that be your challenge. Let that be the call to action that you have. Stop living the expected life, the typical life, the life that you're told to live, and start stepping out into the unknown, the uncharted, the places that are scary, and push into the possibilities that you only imagine could be real and start creating them. If you don't take action, it will never happen. So today's a great day to start. Make that decision, make that action, and begin to move those dreams and ideas forward. As we wrap up today's show, we want to thank a few people. We want to thank Kerry Gallivan for taking time out, sharing the story of Chimani, encouraging us to have adventure, and so much more in today's show. You can check them out, chimani.com. Use that code JUMBLE to get 50% off your first year. That is the guidepost for your adventures into the national parks. So head on over, use that code, and make sure to connect with him. Let him know what you thought about the episode too. We also want to thank today's sponsors. We want to thank Penji. They are your source for unlimited graphic design at a low monthly subscription rate. They are really cool, and for our listeners, they're offering you something very special. Use the code JUMBLE, JUMBLE, to get 15% off your first month. We also want to thank our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com. Whether you want to learn or teach abroad, they are your connection to those experiences. Head on over OpportunityInChina.com and connect with them. We also want to thank you, the listener. It means the world to us that you would tune in every week, whether it's on radio or in the podcast form, and listen to our show. I hope it's an encouragement to you to step into that unknown, to take the journey that's unexpected, and create the world you want to live in. So get out there, dream big, and change the world around you.
Étirez-vous doucement, mais complètement. En avant, en arrière, sur les côtés. Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant. Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.